Welcome.
Welcome back, everyone. Great to be here on this exciting panel, which we will take forward after consuming our and minimally processed lunch. So today we are here to talk about ultra-processed foods, which you've heard. And I'm just going to take a moment very quickly to introduce our distinguished panel. We have Carolyn Orfila Jenkins, who is Vice President of Science Technology at Oatly. Welcome. Kevin Hall, a nutrition scientist and the author of a brand new book called Food Intelligence. And Stella Nordhagen, who is research lead at the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition Gain. So, tasked with the difficult task of starting with a definition, I'm Lynnette Neufeld. I'm the Director of Food and Nutrition at FAO. So I'm going to take the definition from the State of Food Security and Nutrition in the World, the SOFI report, in 2023, that defined ultra-processed foods and drink products as products that are formulated mostly or entirely from substances derived from foods or other organic sources, and typically contain little or no whole foods, and often contain high quantities of fats, salt, and sugar. That is SOFI 2024, and you can find that report online if you're interested. Although that's the report I chose to cite, I could have taken many other definitions. The most common classification system is the NOVA classification, but there are other definitions, and there's a lot published on this topic, as you well know. There's deep divisions on the topic between industry and the nutrition community, as we hear constantly, but there's also divisions even within the nutrition community. There is not full agreement on the topic, on the definition, on the health implications, and so forth. So we're going to talk about that for the next 25 minutes. Okay, so straight into it. We're not going to resolve all those conflicts, but we're hoping to delve into them and to discuss some of the issues, but more importantly, some of the ways forward that can help us address this issue and come to a common understanding and what we need to do about it. So Kevin, starting with you. The term ultra-processed covers everything from sugary and salty snacks to flavored dairy to fortified plant-based products and animal source food alternatives. Does that single UPF category work from the perspective of evidence and the implications for health of these products?
Thanks for the question. I mean, I think that we have to acknowledge that it's not just the most common use, NOVA. It is by far the most common definition that's being used across the research literature. And so I'm going to use the NOVA definition of ultra-processed foods just because that's where the evidence base is. And I think that what most people will acknowledge is that it is a very, a very wide group of foods, of which some are likely to be more hazardous to health than others. And yet, when we look at the epidemiological evidence, it seems like diets high in ultra-processed foods in various different countries around the world, there seems to be these links with diet-related chronic diseases. And the question is, does it go beyond the nutrients of concern, the salt, the sugar, and the fat, saturated fat in particular? And several analyses have been done to try to look at that and subcategorize within the group of ultra-processed foods which kinds of foods might be the most problematic players. And I think that the evidence is pretty clear that there are clear bad guys, and then there are what the mechanisms are beyond the nutrient profile is still a little bit uncertain. And some of the work that we've been doing on a mechanistic side has been trying to match different diets for various nutrients and seeing if there are metabolic as well as other effects when people choose to consume diets very high in ultra-processed foods versus minimally processed diets, and try to get at the mechanisms, because the idea is if we could understand mechanisms by which these foods or subcategories of those foods are causing poor health, then we can target subcategories and understand what is really driving the effects.
Okay. So the main area of new research focus that you would give it is on mechanisms of understanding.
I think that that's key, because if we could understand mechanisms, then we can subcategorize, and our policymakers and the food industry would know which products are in part of their portfolio that are particularly problematic. And just to give a hint, we've been able to reformulate diets very high in ultra-processed foods so that the people don't overconsume calories if we address fundamental hypotheses about what's driving overconsumption.
Okay, great. So that might lead to perhaps a new, shall we say, Nova 2, since we like the second edition this weekend, that has additional categories rather than a single Nova category, for example.
I mean, I think one of the things that there's a lot of confusion around is that even the definition of ultra-processed foods does not mean that, does not say by definition that these foods are unhealthy.
Right.
That's an empirical question, and it's a different lens of looking at foods than the usual nutritional profiling that we have. I view it as a valuable addition to the research picture. Whether or not you use it in regulations and policies is a completely separate question.
Great. Okay. So with that, let's go to the food industry, represented today by Oatly. Where do you see the greatest opportunities and challenges for food technology and innovation to help meet the goals that are set by Eat Lancet, and bringing in this question around ultra-processed food in that process?
Yes, I will start briefly with the challenges. And one challenge, and actually is a challenge to all of us, is to really move away from this idea that any process that is not done in the home or within a domestic scale is automatically having negative consequences for nutritional profile. Many crops, including whole cereals, legumes, oilseeds, the cornerstones of the planetary health diet, need some degree of processing to make them edible, to make them safe, and also to increase the bioaccessibility of nutrients that are contained within them. So I come to the opportunity, and I think that the opportunity for a plant-based sector to contribute and to support consumers to transition, it's a great opportunity. It's not just an opportunity for high-income settings, it's also an opportunity for low-income settings where perhaps we can look at, promoting these plant-based foods or production of these instead of going to intensive animal production. So I think let's look at the opportunities within that transition. And on the opportunities, the plant-based sector is innovative, it's very mission-driven. And just to focus on Oatly, we use a bioprocess to turn whole oats into a liquid. And by doing so, we retain some of these oat nutrients, but also increase the bioaccessibility, particularly thinking about fiber and some polyphenols. So I think we need to look at it in a balanced way. The oat nutrients, in our case, are complemented with unsaturated fats from rapeseed oil, and also with fortificants. So we add calcium, iodine, vitamins B2, B12, and D. And I wanted to go into that detail because these nutrients have been mentioned in the report as nutrients of concern, or nutrients that we need more of: fiber, unsaturated fats, and some of these micronutrients. So I think the alternative dairy sector has an opportunity to contribute positively to this transition. And I hope that some of these foods and some of these concepts will be taken into account in future models.
Good. Yeah, so you've highlighted a couple of things that I think are really important to take a moment to re-emphasize. And one, through this debate and these discussions, it seems that sometimes processing gets lumped into ultra-processing, which is very not true. There's all kinds of processing. Processing is a centuries-old
it's
process.
Practice. It's a practice that we use to make most plant foods edible. We also apply it to animal-based foods, etc. So I think we need to take it holistically as well, and understand the advantages and the disadvantages. I would also say I think that food system transformation need technologies at scale. And I think that is something that is facilitated through industrial processing. And there is plenty of innovation, and we saw slides earlier in the science section about technology and the role of technology. And we must continue to innovate to make processes more efficient, resource efficient, energy, water efficient. We can use AI responsibly, for example, from the farm through the factory to all the way to consumers, as an example. There are plenty of opportunities, and I think we need to look at seriously how can we make the food manufacturing sector a positive contributor to the transformation.
Good. And being a bit cautious in our language and our nuance in our language to make sure that we don't lump everything together in a bucket when there in reality are quite different processes that are happening.
Correct.
We'll come back to that. Oh, I did want to also call out, you did talk about food fortification, and that's something that has come up quite a lot, as you mentioned, the importance of ensuring that some of those key nutrients of concern, fortification can be a part of the solution for that.
Correct, yes.
So with that, maybe let's go to some issues around global perspective and equity from Stella. So there are countries that are embedding ultra-processed foods into policies, into strategies, into different programmatic actions. Do you think that a rigid stance on UPFs, for example, in food-based dietary guidelines, having statements about that are very rigid, or in public food procurement, which again we've heard a lot about in these last couple of days, could inadvertently worsen malnutrition in vulnerable populations?
Yeah, thanks, Lynnette. I do think there are some risks for that to happen, and I would say that they operate through maybe 5 different pathways, which are about some of the beneficial characteristics of ultra-processed foods and other types of processed foods. The first one you already hit upon is fortification. So using industrial processes almost entirely at a very large scale to add micronutrients to staple foods. Currently, fortification prevents about 3 billion inadequate intakes of micronutrients, particularly for iron and iodine worldwide. That helps to avoid a huge burden of ill health. We need to be careful about approaches that would too rigidly crack down and make those foods less accessible or affordable to the people who need them, who are particularly low-income people in low-income settings, but really benefits many populations around the world. Second thing I'd focus on would be shelf stability. So many ultra-processed foods, the reason they're ultra-processed is that so they can stay on shelves, stay in different distribution chains for long periods while still being good to eat, while still being fresh. In places like Stockholm, that's more a matter of convenience and helpful to the industry. But if we go to rural and remote areas where maybe there isn't a functioning cold chain, where maybe you are days away from the nearest production center, if you go to settings where people maybe don't have access to refrigeration or freezing or safe storage, these can be a real way to make the food, nutritious foods in some cases, so certainly not all, more accessible to more people. Closely related to that is the question of food safety. Food safety from a global perspective is a huge issue, one that we probably don't talk about enough, but 600 million cases of foodborne disease every year. A lot of the benefits of processing, including ultra-processing, is making ways for foods to remain safe so that they don't make people sick. Next, I'd mention convenience. A lot of these foods are made to be fast to prepare, easy to eat. We live in a setting where a lot of people don't have the time to prepare foods from scratch. That's particularly true of low-income populations who are time poor in addition to being resource poor. Processing, including in some cases ultra-processing, can make it easier for them to access those foods within their constraints. Finally, I'd emphasize affordability. It depends a bit on where you look and how you analyze the data, but we do see generally that these foods tend to be relatively affordable to many unprocessed and minimally processed alternatives, helping to improve access, again, if it's the right foods with the right nutritional profile, which I think we need to emphasize. We need to avoid dichotomies that are overly simplistic here, right? Just because there are these potentially beneficial aspects of some UPFs in some context for some populations does not mean it's open season on the entire category, or that we need to have half of our calories, like in the US right now, coming from foods with paragraph-long ingredient lists. But there's a space for some beneficial role.
Okay. Maybe picking up on that last point that you made and thinking back to the opportunities from industry, how can we manage this a little bit? Because we want industry innovating in UPF. We want to avoid over claims on health. We want to avoid greenwashing. So what would you recommend to industry in that regard in advancing this area? And then I'm going to come back to industry to tell us what you want.
Yeah, great question. I do think looking at kind of the Eat Lancet dietary pathways, we see there what do people need to eat more of, what do they need to eat less of. I think we can use processing, including in some cases ultra-processing, as a way to get people more of the good. So focusing in on underconsumed categories like legumes. What are the barriers that people face to incorporating more legumes into their diet? What are the ways in which processing, normal processing, can help to overcome those barriers? Is there a place where that doesn't go far enough and where ultra-processing would really help to overcome those barriers? So I think it's about focusing on that kind of compass of the healthy diet that we want to achieve, understanding what prevents it at present, and seeing where processing is the right tool to get there.
Okay. Come back to you on that.
I think it's the industry has a responsibility, and I think we are responsible for designing and formulating our products to have those nutrients that people need. And I think that's at Oatly something we take very seriously, and everything we add, from the selection of the raw materials through the process to what we add at the end, has been carefully thought through to address public health needs, to ensure food safety and accessibility and affordability. So I think that is really compatible with what responsible industries should be doing.
Right. So that key word, that responsibility within industry, and accepting that and embedding that within your value proposition as a business, as that responsibility towards public health, towards environment and so forth that we're hearing about here.
Yes, exactly. I think public health and planetary health must remain our priority for all of us. So I think that's our focus, really.
Okay.
And I would say from industry, I think what we really need is clarity. I think that we need robust research evidence to inform policy development and decision making, because without that, I think it can. You have the risk of unnecessary mistrust and confusion, and not necessarily actions that we can take. So I really welcome that we could, work together, and I think that in this sense, cooperation, collaboration is essential between food scientists, food engineers, physiologists, nutritionists, really to, come up with the right hypotheses. And then the right way to get the evidence. And that will take time and investment. But I think we deserve that kind of robustness, especially in a setting like this forum, where we have heard amazing levels of detailed data, evidence. We deserve the same in this topic, I think.
One thing I'd like to point out, maybe pushing back a little bit on the kumbaya moment that we seem to be having here, is that, the idea of ultra-processed foods and this new lens of looking at foods in our food system and in dietary patterns has, I think, captured the public's attention in a way that's much more profound than all the discussion about saturated fat, sodium, and sugar has in an individual basis, and has led to a sort of an understanding that we really do need to address in countries that have diet-related chronic disease, some political will to make change. And I think that one of the common themes that we've heard throughout these 2 days is that we need that political will to make change. So to what extent can we use the political motivation and the power of this narrative about ultra-processed foods to have a little bit of humility that we don't understand everything there is about diet and health and nutrition, to use this idea to better understand our food and how it affects us, better understand the mechanisms, because that is the path forward. That is the way that we can improve the food systems and at the same time garner the political momentum that this topic and this issue has raised to make changes that we would all agree with. To use ultra-processed products that have a good nutritional profile, to make it more convenient and easy for people to actually consume what most people would agree is a healthy diet, one that looks more like the planetary health diet.
Right, and building on that, and maybe I'll ask each of you to answer this very, very quickly. one of the things that I really appreciate in this version too is the recognition of the importance of the local context in the diet and the need for the adaptation of the Lancet diet to context. While that recognition is there, we also see from dietary data that diets are becoming more and more homogeneous, and you're seeing that proliferation and changes in dietary patterns and the loss of a lot of traditional diets, well documented, for example, in the Mediterranean region with the loss of the Mediterranean diet, but similarly so very much elsewhere. So where do you see UPFs fitting into that? Retention of local dietary patterns, the good part of that, because not all local dietary patterns are healthy. We need to make some adaptation to those local patterns as well. But where do you see UPFs fitting into that? Both on the maybe not focusing on the challenges, but focusing on the opportunity in that regard. And maybe we'll start with Stella and then come around here.
Yeah, sure. No, I think the context specificity is really important here, because we look at countries again like the US or the UK, more than half of calories are already coming from these foods. There, I think it's a question about how do we steer back to those healthier diets that to a certain extent we used to eat. To a certain extent, we've never quite achieved that, and we could do more to get there in the future. But recognize we need to meet people where they are, right? If you're starting from that level to drop it down to zero, it's not realistic, and we need to instead think about, going down, using these as tools that are useful for increasing adoption of a healthy and sustainable diet, and trying to reduce their share in the diet over time. In contrast, when we look at a lot of low-income countries, there's a very small share of these foods in the diet, and there's a much stronger adherence to the traditional diet, which has positive and negatives in those contexts, right? I think we do need to recognize that many of these traditional diets are not necessarily providing all of the nutrients that people need, and that's where there are opportunities that are presented by processing. It doesn't necessarily have to be ultra-processing. Again, this is a false dichotomy to put these two extremes up there, but we should look for those opportunities and try and leverage only those while retaining what's left that's good in those traditional diets.
Okay. Anything to add to that quick, Kevin?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think I would emphasize the point that if we understood mechanisms by which this wide category seems to still be associated with health, then we would be able to target the kinds of foods that we want to encourage that may still be ultra-processed. It's not an oxymoron to have a healthy ultra-processed food. That's perfectly possible. And then there's a bunch that are probably neutral for health, and then there's several that are probably causing a lot of the harm that we see, and we can use that evidence and that research that we don't yet have to better understand what to do.
Okay. Any quick response on that one?
I think we have the potential to harness the potential of plant diversity within the local context, identify what grows well, what grows sustainably, and use the technologies, perhaps using the advances of technology to formulate or to process and formulate the foods that are adapted to local diets. And I think using the plant power, if you like, but also then using responsible fortification, it's a very cost-effective strategy. I think those two together, I think we could come up with some really important developments that preserves the tradition.
Great. Thank you. Okay, so last round. In about 45 seconds each, what's the one thing that you consider most important to advance the evidence, the knowledge, and the practice related to UPF? One new thing, if you can, from each of the perspective, from academia, from global organizations, and from industry. And maybe we'll move this way. Yes. So one
Start
thing.
With me?
Yeah.
I think collaboration and cooperation between industry, between academia, NGOs, but also across the globe. So this is not a high-income country issue, and we should look at research that includes, different perspectives. So that would be my ask,
Collaboration.
And hopefully starts today.
Okay.
This cooperation.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be a little self-serving and say that I think what we really need is a lot more investment in the rigorous research that's independent, unbiased, not coming from industry funding, or if it is, it has to have manage the influence of that funding, and is focused on trying to understand the mechanisms and uncover what it is about ultra-processed foods that are related to poor health.
Okay.
Building on that, I'd say more specific categories that can really hone in better on positive versus negative parts of the ultra-processed category built on an understanding of the mechanisms, but ones that can actually be actionable for guiding consumer choices, guiding policy and public decisions.
Great. Thank you for those. I think you've highlighted a real challenging but critical road ahead. So we know that one of the challenges we've had here is the wall that has been somewhat up between academia and industry on this topic, when we need to find ways to collaborate on that and break that down so that we are generating that evidence, but not only generating, because maybe you can generate the evidence in academia, but you need the take-up and the acceptance of that evidence, and that requires that dialogue and collaboration. And yeah, we have a long way to go still, but I think we've made a little bit of progress today. I hope you agree. And I think this conversation can be continued and should be continued. And that subcategory might be our next thing that we're talking about when we meet here again in Lancet 3.0, when we've resolved the evidence issues and we've established the collaboration, and we can really take forward the positive side of this while mitigating the health risks and taking advantage of the benefits. And I think we'll stop at that, unless you have one 10-second last word you'd like to give.
Fund more human nutrition research.
Gonna have to applaud on that one. Absolutely. Thank you. Okay.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.